I want to talk to Danny since we have you. I remember when I left Florida, years ago, I actually had like a negative perspective of church planners. My perspective was like, why are we planning churches when there's already and this is obviously living in the South. It's like, why do we plant churches when there's so many churches there? And I was like, we should be like Matt Chandler and just revitalize everything. Like we shouldn't be like planting new churches. And then obviously over the years I've matured and I've learned more about like actually church planting is probably the tool God uses to prune the church in many ways. And start like gospel-centered Bible-believing churches and places where faith has maybe have gotten a little bit dormant. But also one thing that you kind of helped me understand moving to Epikos is a perspective of church marketing that isn't like gross, if that makes sense. Like so much for even the phrase church marketing is almost like
can't use it
so worldly. Worldliness.
Yeah, it's funny because I do a few different workshops at conferences, and I think, how do I title this differently? Because I will lose people by putting church marketing in there that actually could learn and benefit from it. And I think that I'm trying to remember if I put one of them was like, is church marketing a swear word or something like that, just to try to like capture the attention, maybe a little bit of marketing in there. And I'm a huge fan of it. And because I boil it down to this, is that to me, it's a gospel awareness issue. So if we can say, all right, the whole idea is how do you make the gospel aware to more people? That's what we want to do. And yes, certainly the church is part of it. And you can go down a path that is gross and corporate, but I don't think we have to throw out the baby with the bathwater type of thing. And so if there are ways that we can say, how do we communicate the gospel, communicate opportunity for people to come and, find out about Jesus, follow Jesus, then we definitely want to do that. So I'm a huge advocate.
So my first question is this. My brother-in-law planted a church in D.C. He graduated from Southeastern Seminary, got a good church planting degree, and then he went to D.C., planted a church. 3 years later, that 3-year time limit came, closed it all down, and it all ended. And now he's at a church actually not too far in Lebanon, Tennessee. But
what church is he at? He's pretty close to me then.
Yeah, I actually don't know the name of the church. I always forget to ask. It's actually it's
a great church.
It's a bigger SBC church.
Crushing it.
He's killing it. Actually, he's a great youth pastor out there. But my question to you is, it's like, obviously, I doubt COVID-19 has helped anything. But like, what is kind of like, at least within Converge, or if you know more nationally, what's the state of church planning that's happening right now, kind of in this moment?
Yeah. So first couple months, I did have my church planning pipeline just dried up because everybody was basically wait and see. And like I said and shared earlier, even just for myself, of just being like, oh man, is there even a place for church planning anymore? But what I've seen actually in the last about month, maybe 6 weeks, there's actually been a resurgence. And some of it were the people that were in the pipeline before that I kind of pumped the brakes and said, I just, I need to wait and see how this whole thing is going to happen. But our church plant, some that had just recently launched, October, January, February, huge launches, reaching people for Christ. All of a sudden, you can't meet anymore. I'm thinking, man, are they going to survive? And a lot of those church planters and church plants are thriving. Some that are still 100% exclusive online. So even the church plant that I'm a part of a church plant. They went online. They decided to go back to in-person gathering. I think about a month ago, they had 41 brand new people on the day of return that had only found out about the church by watching online. Met for 2 weeks, and we're now back to only online because of the resurgence of coronavirus. But it's kind of like, we know that it works. We just even saw, people come to Christ, new people coming to the church. And, there's another church, a planter that I'm working with in Clarksville, Tennessee. 2 weeks ago, he had 7 people come to Christ. And these were not just people that were watching online. These were people where there was pre-established pre-established relationships that were happening within the church. And it was neighbors who now had a piqued curiosity. They had known about the church, and now COVID had kind of forced them to ask deeper spiritual questions. So for me, that has now put me back on the excited part to go, absolutely, church planting can happen. And again, that whole innovation thing where guys are going, well, man, maybe we can break some of the stereotypes that we have, that this is the way that a church looks. This is what church gathering looks like. This is what Sunday looks like. I mean, everything is essentially a clean slate. And so they're getting to try a lot of different things. So it's put me in just definitely an excited place for guys to try new things.
Yeah. So it's almost like, because it seems like church planners, tend to be like more aware of like how to do these online services and how to kind of pivot in those places. Like, do you think like church planners are kind of at an advantage because they're more quicker to adapting to this stuff, or
yeah, maybe
that's interesting.
Maybe from a personality point, the adaptability to be able to do it. But even again, for the church plant that I'm a part of, launched just in October, so it's under a year old. No online services at all. So it was basically March 14th. Hey guys, guess what? We can't meet anymore because all of a sudden there's this, stay at home order. How are we going to do online services? Okay, someone go get a camera. Someone go buy a camera. And now, I mean, they do just a superb job of doing their online services. They were doing pre-recorded. They do live now. Actually preached there this past weekend. And yeah, so for them, it was a matter of drive. And maybe that's part of the personality of the church planner. Hey, we've got an obstacle. We've got a challenge. How do we innovate? How do we overcome it? Type of thing. So
that's good. I hinted towards this earlier. When I left my last church to here, the way I would describe Epikos, and I mean this in the best way because I know this has like a slight negative connotation, but it was the Mars Hill of the Midwest, right? Like it's like that kind of like really kind of cool church in the city where everyone's wearing plaid and has beards. Like that's literally like how I would describe it. And that's what kind of drew me to it because like we talked about this a couple episodes ago. It's like, we kind of grew up on Mark Driscoll and kind of that whole like kind of masculine, but like kind of loving the gospel and trying to reach our city and stuff like that. But one thing that I found out when I came here was there's an ad in the church, in the mall. And it's this kind of like big middle kiosk thing. And it's a picture of a guy. And it's kind of like, I guess the chest down. And he's holding a Bible and he's wearing jeans. And he has tattoos on his arm. And the ad says, would Jesus wear jeans? And then it's like, that's the question. And then it's like service times and like locations of our church. When I tell you, literally, 1 out of every 5 people who fill out a Connect card, when they ask, how did you hear about us? They'll say, it's that mall ad. And when I go into town and I say, like, I go to Epikos, they'll say, oh, you're that church in Mayfair Mall with the Jesus jeans ad. And I'm like, yeah, that's us or whatever. and it's interesting because, like, as much as our church has changed, that ad's still there and it's still working. And it's probably like the only aspect of our, marketing budget that's still, being used, monthly or whatever. But I guess like, a question I think is beyond just church plans, but everyone in this room is what marketing tips have you seen been like working well? What advice would you give to the Jeff and Andrews who are in congregations or less than 100 people or whatever? Like what would be great church marketing tips right now?
Yeah. Well, I want to speak to that ad a little bit too, just really quick, because I think there's some principles that can be taken from it. Understand that I think it's almost even like cliche and cringy now, obviously, when I hear, because it actually, I did write it myself and then it got copied, kind of along the way, and people are like, oh, that's so cheesy or whatever. But here's the thing to explain that is that the image has a lot of dissonance in it. So any visual marketing, I shouldn't say any, a lot of the visual marketing that has worked for myself and others is that there is visual dissonance. In other words, you saw Jesus, Bible, and tattoo. Something doesn't fit here. So you literally have like split seconds to grab someone's attention. So that is the visual dissonance of that, where you at least go, wait, Jesus jeans, okay, Jesus and jeans, that doesn't go together. Bible, tattoo, that doesn't go together. So it stops someone to just pause and to read. And it's actually, if you read that whole thing, it's it's really the gospel message in there saying, hey, it's not about outward appearance, because people misunderstood that ad to be like, oh, you can come to this church and wear jeans. Has nothing to do about what you can wear to church. It's about that whole, have you been judged because of the outside? Well, that's not the gospel message. And so I didn't have any qualms about even spending money sending that out to people, because whether they never step foot into the church, they at least got the gospel message in there as well too. So obviously right now, if you don't have a presence on social media, you are just missing millions and millions and millions of people. I mean, the amount of time that people are spending on their phones, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. I mean, you just need to have presence there. And the biggest thing that I say is it is not using those platforms as your billboard, but to actually be social. So if all you do is say, all right, tea time is this, make sure you come back to services, and all you're doing is basically putting advertisements, our minds are trained enough now to quickly go by that. The biggest thing that you can do is actually be social, be pastoral. I mean, that's, I can't remember who was saying that before, about just being pastoral. Be pastoral on social media. Use that time to be engaged with people, praying for people, being social, showing what you're doing. Maybe even more than having your perfectly slick produced video sermon, show how you did it, because people are curious. How did you do that? So have someone take cell phone as you have your little camera set up with and it's like, oh, so that's what it is. People are more apt to follow and engage in the more authentic that you are in things. So that's what I'm saying. Do I still think, you could use billboards and mailers and all those things? Absolutely. Of course, use those. But if you have diminishing budget, you've got social media, which is 100% free. Start there.
That's good. So my church just planted a new campus in this part of town. It's kind of like it's kind of void of kind of traditional Protestant churches, not traditional Protestant, like churches like ours, Bible belief, like basically non-Catholics, non-Lutherans. Like there's not a lot of churches in that area that are like fit in that demographic. So it was kind of like, this is a unique place where we're going to plant a church where there's not a lot of churches like this. And so, but there were a handful of churches. And so one of my jobs that were given to me by my boss was like, hey, make sure you make a relationship with those churches in the area, because some of those churches are like our friends. There's literally a church down the street that's a Hmong church that is actually an Alliance church, Jeff. But like we're like, oh, we're bros. We could but they specifically are targeting Hmong people. So like there's no competition there whatsoever. But there is a new church plant that just started about a year ago. And they're a little different than ours in some of their style, a little more charismatic than us. But one thing I did is I got lunch with them and I said, hey, the school you're in, we have teachers that are in the school and we want to build a relationship with the school, but I want us to be cool. And so we had a good lunch and we had a good time. And we're like, hey, how can we reach this part of Wauwatosa for Christ together in whatever capacity that really looks like? And I heard Jeff, he had at one point 3 church plants kind of meeting, or 3 churches meeting within his church. And so, Danny, I guess my question is us as pastors and campus pastors that establish churches, what can we do to support church planters in our community, especially if it's like me and Delmar who are planning new campuses and churches where there might be a new church planter already there? What are ways that we can support church planters? Yeah,
no, that's a great question. And I don't want to seem like I'm just pumping my podcast on here, but I literally just did an episode with John Ferguson. He's, big in the exponentials. And we talked about this very issue. And it is just so important. So if you're saying supporting church planters in your area is, and I'm hoping, because this is what I'm telling church planters, go meet with the pastors. So exactly what you did, just take that lunch. Just take that coffee appointment. And I know what it's like, because I remember when I was a church planter and I was trying to meet with pastors, like, why would they not want to meet with me? And then all of a sudden, as Epicosa got a little more established and church planters wanted to meet, I'm like, why do they want to meet? We've got this area taken care of, type of thing. And it's just funny how the tables turn. And what I have found over the years is that the more that you meet with pastors, even just on a relational level, the less they tend to grow horns. So in other words, the more that I was disconnected from other pastors, I'd begin to think they're selling out. They're not teaching sound doctrine. They're doing these different, and it's like, you know what? And then I'd meet with them like, that was just my own gross sinful nature that was basically allowing them to, fit this image of all these negative things. So I would say the biggest thing you can do to support is honestly just have that relationship. And where it really matters is when you do start to see people moving from church to church from the area, you as pastors really do get to say, hey, just a heads up, this person's coming, and here's the real story of why they're coming over, so.
And honestly, I found that's really practical, just honest with a lot of parachurch organizations in general. Like we invited to our local pastor gathering, we invite the young life leaders, the adults, to come, because it's the same thing. Pull them into we're on the same team. Versus, I know there was another church that moved on our side of town, and another church had a special call business meeting for how are we going to deal with the new church in town. That was told to me this week.
Yeah.
Wow. I was like, wow. So
this is not, I promise it's not to toot my own horn. I have no say in this. And I was just literally impressed with this. There was a church plant that's very similar to Epikos in my church that was not too far from one of our campuses, who just started. And about maybe 6 families from our church were considering going to that church. And we not only absolutely gave them their blessing, we guest preached at their church. And wow. It was one of those really, really cool things where it's we gave them some people. And these are good people. These are top-notch volunteers that where I was like, we're just going to let them go like that. But the church is solid. I've met their senior, the church planner pastor.
Is it Danny DeQuisto?
Yeah, that guy. Yeah. And so it's just a good church. It's a good guy. And we had different pastors in our church, guest preach for him. And it's just one of those things where it's that's actually being real and saying we're willing to give up some people to make sure you launch successfully. And we're going to give you good people. We're not going to give you the people we want to leave. We want to give you some of our best people. And I was just impressed with our church seeing that and being now looking at their Instagram and seeing them serve basically in a mobile church. And I'm like, oh man, I love seeing them serve, but I also love them. I wish this is all good for the kingdom at the end. And so that was good. Awesome. Hey, thanks, Danny. Again, I just want to make sure people hear this. What, plug everything you want to hear. What's the podcast? What is it called?
You can just search 101 Questions Church Planters Ask. The handle for Instagram is @ChurchPlantersAsk. Would love to have people follow along, and if anybody's listening to this is even considering church planning, just give me a direct message. Again, I don't try to twist arms or force anybody or recruit anybody. It's really a matter of helping guys to discern if that's what God has called them to.
And it sounds like the Venn diagram of church planners and just smaller churches. There's a lot of information that's going to be beneficial. I mean, even like I said, even hearing that clip on Instagram about the elders, I was like, oh, that's good to know.